Hey everyone, my name is Dan Shimolinski. People like to call me Shimmy, and you can too. And welcome back to our sample school, our deep dive into Soundpaint. At this point, we have pretty much covered all the nuts and bolts of creating sounds within Soundpaint, but I thought I would take a moment today to tell you a little bit about the last remaining rack module that we skipped over, because the legatos in Soundpaint are absolute art. So what is a legato? The definition of the word legato means in a smooth, flowing manner. And in a musical capacity, it means exactly the same thing. When playing acoustic instruments in a sample player, there's a lot of little tricks that you can do to make it sound more real, more authentic, more musical, more emotional. Assigning things to the mod wheel, maybe you have dynamic sustains and you want to give a volume increase as your phrase becomes more intense. Maybe you add some motion, some vibrato to the pitch that kind of slowly increases its amount as you move a mod wheel. You give a generous amount of long attack and release so that everything kind of flows and feels very natural. Maybe played into a beautiful Lexi reverb emulation. But at the core of the sample itself, it's not always easy to make it sound seamless, effortless, smooth, and real. Legato allows you to do that. Because with select instruments in Soundpaint, we have not only sampled the sustain of the note, the attack of the note, the release of the note, but the transitions of note to note. The little artifacts, slides, sounds that happen when a real player is playing an instrument passing from one note to the next. The legato is that transition. So if you have two notes, sustain with attack and release, and you want to go from note A to note B, the sound of the player passing from that note to the other note is a legato sample. And in Soundpaint, it is handled brilliantly. I want to pull up one of my favorite legato libraries. This is the 1987 alto flute library. And you'll notice that parts with legato capabilities will always have the word legato in them. And before I even start messing with settings, I just kind of want to play this for you so you can hear what it sounds like. And you're already going to notice that it is a step above the rest in terms of realism. It sounds so connected and beautiful. Because this is a legato part, we do have the ability to turn legato on or off in the sound mode. Here's what that same passage sounds like without legato. It's nice, but there's something missing. It is the ability to have that transitional information. A little bit of a click on the key. It's a little bit of a roll into it. It's just beautiful. And with many sample players and legato instruments, the transitions kind of are what they are. You don't get that much control of them. But in Soundpaint, we have an entire module dedicated to it. I'm gonna go ahead and load the legato module. Boom, you can see this is a per part controller. So if you had 8 legato parts, you could have them all behaving slightly differently if you wanted. And the first word that should catch your eye is polyphonic. We talked about that word previously in the context of glide, mono glide, right? The ability to play one single note at a time. Whereas polyphonic means you can play multiple notes at the same time. Now with the alto flute, you could play a single note line, one note after another as I just did there. But what if I want a few flutes playing? Maybe there are 2 or 3 flute players playing chords in harmony together. And I want all 3 of those flute players to have legato transitions. Well, in the past, you would probably have to load 3 different instances of the legato instrument, record them one at a time, and it would be very CPU and time intensive, and ultimately not musical. But the ability to play chords and treat each note as its own unique player with its own unique legato transitions, well, we have that. You notice that I was kind of treating each of my fingers as their own legato player, right? And I haven't even touched any of the fine-tuned parameters. This is just pulling up polyphonic legato and seeing how it comes out. And it's not just limited to 2 players, I can do 3 if I want. Or really as many as you have independent finger motion for. Now you could set this to monophonic if you're just doing a single line. But I'm not really sure why you would ever do that, because you can do monophonic lines with polyphonic mode, as I just did, right? Kind of bring in the other player as you wish, maybe have them do a counter line. Something like that. But we do get one control difference here. In polyphonic mode, you have something called chord timer, and in monophonic mode, you have something called mono threshold. So let's first start by talking about the chord timer, which exists in polyphonic mode. And by the way, if you ever wonder what a parameter does in Soundpaint, oftentimes you can just put your mouse over the parameter and it'll give you a simple description. Maximum time between 2 notes to be treated as a chord. By default, it's set to 40 milliseconds. What this means is if I play a chord on the keys, and let's say I want to have a single line on top come out of that top note, the legato takes place almost immediately. But if I don't want that legato to take place immediately, I want the chord to kind of sit a little bit longer, and I don't want it to be as pronounced of a line, I can increase the amount of time that Soundpaint needs to recognize it as a chord versus a single moving line. I'm gonna go from 0 to max so you can hear the difference. Legato all the way through right immediately as I start moving my fingers. But if I do it again with that set to max, it's a little subtler, it's not as expressive. It's treating the notes as, oh, those are just changing notes in a chord, not a single line necessarily. You're not getting that same legato snap that you get with it at 40. This can be really useful for adding players to your chord. So if you start with maybe a 3-note chord, and I want to add a 4th note to the chord, but I don't want it to treat it as though the 3rd player is going up to that note, I can increase my chord timer. And then the legato takes place because I've given it more time. So in short, if you're trying to play a chord where maybe you're adding notes or players, or you want the legato to take place deeper into the sustain, increase your chord timer. I'm going to add a 4th note and then do a legato motion based on that with the chord timer set generously. So the legato happens between these 2 notes, not these 2 notes, even though I played this note after playing this note. Listen to what that sounds like with the chord timer down low. It treats that top note as one single line player, basically increasing the amount of time, giving yourself more time to add notes to the chord rather than create a legato motion. In monophonic mode, this is called mono threshold. This is the minimum amount of time after a note that a legato is triggered. Similar in principle to chord timer, but we're talking in the context of a single note line. So with it set to 40, if I play something at that speed, which is relatively quick changes, the legato happens on every single note. But if I bring up the threshold, the legato only really happens deeper into the line. Legato didn't take place till basically the middle to 3rd note. Listen to it at 40. Legato on every note, and listen to it at full. The legato only happens later on into my line. Now this could be useful if you're playing a single note line and perhaps you're doing some dynamic sustain thing where you really want the first couple notes to be very, very soft and maybe not accent the legato transition as much, kind of a fluffier foo, foo, ah, da, and then you have a legato moment. You can move the threshold up so that it doesn't immediately start taking place. Let's go back to polyphonic because that's really the main difference between mono and poly. I want to jump down and knock out one of the simplest simplest parameters on this module, which is the Legato Volume. Simply put, it is the loudness of that transitional sample. This is a great control to have because sometimes you might have a tender moment where you're doing something with dynamic sustain and a legato just sticks out. Right? That was a very soft note to a very loud note, and if you don't quite nail the velocities, it can pop out. But a simple way to counter that from happening is just to lower the volume of the legato itself. It's really kind of taming the intensity of the legato while not losing its effect. Just a great simple way to kind of trim the effect and make it even that much more smooth. Let's move up to Legato Speed. Transitions of notes in music can happen at various speeds. If I'm a flautist and I want to really kind of milk my phrasing, I might go fa, fa. Or if I'm playing super lightning fast, I might want to go fa, fa, and just have it be momentary. Legato Speed allows you, the user, to control the exact amount of time it takes to transition from note to note without losing the effect of connecting them. Let's set it right in the middle, unchanged, so you can hear the legato in its natural state. Beautiful, simple, graceful. But let's say I want it to go ba, fa, and just be a little punchier, a little bit faster. I can increase the speed of the legato itself. Even more. Super fast, almost imperceptible, but still connects the notes on a level deeper than just sustains. I find that the sweet spot is typically around 30 to 40% fast. I really like that sweet spot, but it varies on the type of passage I'm playing or the type of instrument I'm playing. We can also make it slow if I want to really draw out my phrasing. Just milking that absolute beautiful transition from note to note. And finally, we have Legato Time, the maximum amount of time after a note ends to still trigger the legato sound. You can think about this as a release on the legato itself, a release envelope on your notes from note to note. So you'll notice the way I've been playing has been very connected throughout this entire demo. I'm really going from one note to the next. Almost never picking up my finger from the previous note until the next note has been depressed. Because if I were to let go of a note before, the legato effect would not take place because my legato time is set to 0 milliseconds. So if you are a player that enjoys connecting notes and holding down notes while transitioning to the next note, this really has to do with your playing style. And if you're a player like me that enjoys the feeling of holding down the previous note and pushing the next note and listening to that glide, then you might want to set that pretty low. But if you don't want to be held responsible for perfectly holding down the previous note while playing a legato line, you can increase that amount. So again, I'll try and play very similarly with no legato time and some legato time. It really all depends on how you play. My best advice is to settle on the line that you're trying to play, that you're trying to compose, and make small adjustments to the timer until it feels right, until it feels natural. I think you're almost never going to use probably 4,000 milliseconds, but you might want to back off a little bit and just give yourself a little breathing room. It's a nice option to have. And as with all per part controls, you have individual part selectors here and they can all be different, or you can affect all of them at once by clicking in the upper right. So that's legato. There's a wide variety of legato instruments in the Soundpaint family. This happens to be one of my favorites to illustrate legato on, but I do encourage you to check out the walkthroughs of the specific legato instruments to hear more examples. The saxophones, the woodwinds, the strings, it's all there and it's all fantastic and a joy to play. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. This is Shimmy, signing out. Take care.